The morning sun kissed the golden skyline of Lagos, casting a warm glow on the tall glass buildings and bustling streets. Jessica Adeoye stepped out of her penthouse apartment, her wide smile lighting up her already radiant face. At 34, she had everything she had ever dreamed of: a successful career as a fashion entrepreneur, a close-knit group of friends, and a deep, unshakable faith in God. Her life was the envy of many, yet she remained humble and grateful. Jessica had been planning this Christmas trip for months. It was the first time in years that she would be going back to Ibadan, her hometown, to celebrate with her extended family. Her business had kept her busy for so long that her visits home were often short and hurried. But this time she had promised her mother, Mama Adeoye, that she would spend the entire holiday with them. She had spared no expense in preparing for the journey. Jessica's sleek black Range Rover was freshly serviced, and the trunk was packed with carefully wrapped gifts: luxury perfumes for her sisters, a tailored agbada for her father, and even imported chocolates for the little ones. Her assistant had ensured that her itinerary was flawless, from her departure time to the security measures she would take on the road. The scent of fresh roses filled the penthouse as Jessica finished a video call with her younger sister, Titi. "Jessica, you're really coming this time, right? Mama has been counting down." Titi's voice was full of excitement. "I am. Tell Mama to start preparing her special jollof rice. And remind Dad I'm bringing a surprise for him," Jessica replied, laughing. "Surprise? You better not disappoint," Titi teased. Jessica ended the call, a warm feeling spreading through her chest. Her family meant everything to her, and she couldn't wait to see the joy on their faces when she arrived. The following day, Jessica set out early, her driver, Daniel, at the wheel. The drive from Lagos to Ibadan was usually smooth on a good day, especially with the new expressway cutting the travel time in half. Jessica leaned back into the plush leather seat of her car, her designer sunglasses shielding her eyes from the sun. As they left the city's chaos behind, the landscape transformed into stretches of lush greenery and rolling hills. Jessica pulled out her phone to capture a few moments. Her Instagram followers loved her travel updates, and she didn't mind sharing bits of her luxurious lifestyle with them. After posting a short video of the countryside with the caption, "Homebound for Christmas, Christmas tree sparkling heart #family first," she set her phone aside and began flipping through a leather-bound notebook. The notebook was her prayer journal. Jessica had always been a woman of deep faith, and this journal was where she wrote down her prayers, blessings, and reflections. Before the trip, she had written a prayer for protection. "Lord, as I travel, may your presence go before me and shield me from all harm. Cover my family with your love, and let this Christmas be a time of joy and togetherness. Amen." She reread the prayer and smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. As they approached Ibadan, Jessica's mind wandered to her childhood. She remembered running barefoot through her grandmother's compound, playing hide-and-seek with her siblings, and sneaking bites of freshly baked puff-puff from the kitchen. Life was simpler then, filled with love, laughter, and the aroma of home-cooked meals. When Jessica had moved to Lagos to chase her dreams, she had promised herself she would never lose the connection to her roots. And though her life in the city was now one of opulence, she cherished the memories of her modest upbringing. Hours later, they stopped at a rest area to stretch and grab refreshments. Jessica's outfit, a flowing white kaftan paired with gold sandals, turned heads as she stepped out of the car. Daniel opened a bottle of sparkling water for her while a few locals greeted her respectfully. "You're looking very fine today, Ma," one of them said with a broad smile. "Thank you," Jessica replied graciously. She was used to the attention her beauty and style attracted, but she always made an effort to be polite. As they resumed the journey, Jessica began humming softly to a Christmas hymn playing on the car stereo. Her heart was full. She couldn't wait to hug her mother, share stories with her sisters, and see her father's reaction to the agbada she had spent weeks designing. The day seemed perfect. The road ahead was clear, the skies were blue, and the air was filled with the promise of joy. Jessica closed her eyes briefly, silently thanking God for the blessings in her life. Little did she know, this serene journey was about to take a dangerous turn, one that would test her faith, strength, and courage in ways she could never have imagined. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. Jessica glanced at her watch. They were less than an hour away from her parents' house, and excitement bubbled within her. She began to rehearse how she would surprise her mother, imagining her mother's joyful tears when she saw Jessica walk through the front door. But then something unusual caught her attention. Daniel, her driver, had slowed the car down considerably. Jessica leaned forward, her brow furrowing. "What's wrong, Daniel? Why are we slowing down?" Daniel pointed ahead. A white van had stopped in the middle of the road, its hazard lights blinking. Two men stood beside it, waving frantically as though asking for help. Jessica's stomach tightened with unease. "Daniel, don't stop. Something doesn't feel right." Daniel hesitated, his hand hovering over the gear stick. "But, madam, they look like they need help. Maybe their car broke down." "No," Jessica said firmly. "Drive around them. Now." Daniel nodded and began to steer the car to the side of the road to pass the van. As they approached, one of the men suddenly stepped into their path, forcing Daniel to slam on the brakes. Before Jessica could react, a third man appeared from the bushes, pointing a gun directly at the windshield. "Stay calm, madam," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest as the men surrounded the car. One of them banged on her window with the butt of his gun. "Get out. Now," he barked, his voice harsh and menacing. Jessica froze, her mind racing. She clutched her phone, considering calling for help, but another man smashed Daniel's window, shattering the glass. Daniel raised his hands in surrender, his face pale with fear. "Please don't hurt us," Jessica pleaded, her voice shaking. The men yanked open the car doors, dragging Jessica and Daniel out. Her luxurious kaftan snagged on the car door, tearing slightly, but she barely noticed. She was too focused on the chaos around her. "Blindfold them," one of the men ordered. Jessica felt rough hands tie a cloth tightly over her eyes. Her world went dark and her heart sank. She could hear Daniel protesting, his voice muffled by fear, but the sound of a gun being cocked silenced him instantly. Jessica was shoved into a vehicle, its interior smelling of sweat and gasoline. She struggled to steady her breathing, her thoughts a whirlwind of terror. "God, please protect me. Please don't let them kill us." The drive felt endless. Jessica could hear snippets of the men's conversation, their voices gruff and filled with tension. "We'll take them to the hideout," one of them said. "She looks like she's rich," another replied. "We'll get a good ransom for her." Jessica's hands trembled in her lap. Ransom. That meant they wouldn't kill her immediately. But what about Daniel? Would they let him go? Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. She tried to pray, but fear choked her words. All she could do was repeat one phrase in her mind: "God, please help me." Hours later, the vehicle came to a stop. Jessica was dragged out and led into what felt like a building. The air was damp and cold, and the floor beneath her feet was rough. When they finally removed the blindfold, she blinked rapidly, trying to adjust to the dim light. The room was small and dingy, with cracked walls and a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Jessica spotted Daniel in the corner, his face bruised but alive. Relief washed over her. One of the men, tall and scarred, stepped forward. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice cold. "You're going to call your family and tell them we want 50 million naira. If they don't pay, you won't leave here alive." Jessica's breath hitched. "I don't have that kind of money," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man sneered. "Then they better find it." He threw a phone onto the floor in front of her. Jessica hesitated, her hands trembling as she picked it up. She dialed her mother's number, tears streaming down her face. "Hello." Mama Adioi's warm voice came through the line. Jessica's throat tightened. She didn't know how to break the news. "Mama, it's me," she began, her voice shaking. "Jessica, are you close? We've been waiting." "Mama, listen to me," Jessica interrupted. "I've been kidnapped. They're asking for 50 million naira. Please, please pray for me." The line went silent for a moment. Then came the sound of her mother's anguished cry. "Oh my God. No. Jessica, my daughter, no." The scarred man snatched the phone from Jessica's hand and ended the call. "That's enough." The hours dragged by. Jessica sat on the cold floor, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She tried to think of an escape plan, but every option seemed impossible. The men were armed, and the building was surrounded by dense forest. Daniel sat beside her, his head bowed. "I'm so sorry, madam," he whispered. "This is all my fault. I should have listened to you." "It's not your fault," Jessica said, though her voice was heavy with despair. She closed her eyes and began to pray silently. Lord, I don't know how this will end, but I trust you. Please give me strength. Please guide me. Her faith, though shaken, was her only source of hope. In the early hours of the morning, the kidnappers returned. They looked agitated, their voices raised as they argued among themselves. The family says they need more time to get the money, one of them said angrily. We can't wait forever, another replied. If they don't pay, we'll have to, you know. He gestured toward Jessica and Daniel. Jessica's heart sank. She knew what he meant. As the men continued their argument, Jessica whispered a desperate prayer. God, I need you now more than ever. Please show me a way out. And though she couldn't see it yet, her prayers were beginning to work in ways she couldn't imagine. The room was heavy with silence after the kidnappers left, their angry voices still echoing in Jessica's mind. She glanced at Daniel, whose head rested against the wall, his eyes closed as though trying to block out the nightmare they were living. Jessica couldn't afford to give in to despair. Taking a deep breath, she began to pray softly, her hands clasped tightly. Lord, you said you would never leave me nor forsake me. I don't know why this is happening, but I believe you are still with me. Please protect us. Touch the hearts of these men. Let your light shine in this darkness. Her whispered words carried through the room, her voice steady despite the fear threatening to consume her. Daniel opened his eyes, watching her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Madam, he said quietly, how can you still pray? These men, they don't look like they'll let us go. Jessica looked at him, her tear-streaked face filled with determination. Daniel, I believe in a God who is bigger than any problem. Even here he is with us. We just have to trust him. Daniel nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in his eyes. The kidnappers came back an hour later. This time, the scarred leader sat down in front of Jessica, his piercing gaze drilling into her. You seem calm, he said, his tone laced with suspicion. Most people would be screaming or begging by now. Jessica met his eyes. I have nothing to beg you for. My God is my deliverer. If you think you're in control, you're wrong. The man leaned back, his expression unreadable. God? Your God didn't stop us from taking you. Jessica's heart clenched at his words, but she held her ground. You're right. He didn't stop you. But he allowed this for a reason, and I trust him. Maybe it's so you can hear about him. Her boldness seemed to unsettle him. He stood abruptly and walked away, muttering under his breath. The other kidnappers exchanged glances, their expressions uneasy. That night, Jessica and Daniel were left alone again. Jessica could hear the men arguing in another room, their voices growing louder by the minute. They're scared, Daniel said suddenly. Jessica turned to him. What do you mean? I overheard them talking earlier. They think the police might be onto them. One of them said they should let us go before things get worse. Hope flickered in Jessica's chest. If they're scared, it means God is already at work. We just need to keep praying. Daniel hesitated before nodding. Then let's pray, madam. Together. For the first time since their ordeal began, Jessica saw a glimmer of faith in Daniel's eyes. They bowed their heads, their voices blending as they prayed for protection, wisdom, and the softening of their captors' hearts. The following day, Jessica noticed a change in one of the kidnappers. His name was Bala, a younger man with a timid demeanor. He rarely spoke but often glanced at Jessica with an expression that seemed almost remorseful. While the others treated her and Daniel with disdain, Bala quietly placed an extra piece of bread beside Jessica during breakfast. It wasn't much, but it was a gesture that didn't go unnoticed. Thank you, Jessica said softly, meeting his eyes. Bala shifted uncomfortably but didn't reply. That evening, Jessica took a chance. As Bala stood guard near the door, she spoke to him. Bala, I don't know why you're here, but I can see that this isn't who you are. He stiffened, avoiding her gaze. You don't know anything about me. You're right, Jessica admitted. But I know God created you for something better than this. You don't have to do what they're doing. Bala's hands tightened around the gun he was holding. For a moment, Jessica thought he might lash out, but instead he walked away, his shoulders slumped. The tension among the kidnappers grew with each passing day. The scarred leader, whom Jessica had learned was called Sani, became increasingly agitated. The ransom money had not come through and the pressure was mounting. One night, as Jessica lay awake, she overheard Sani talking to another man. If we don't get the money by tomorrow, we'll have to kill them. We can't keep them here forever. Jessica's blood ran cold. She pressed her lips together to stifle a sob, her mind racing. She prayed more fervently than ever, begging God for a miracle. The next morning, Bala approached Jessica and Daniel while the others were out of the room. His face was pale and his hands trembled as he spoke. "I don't know why, but your prayers, they've been bothering me," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't do this anymore." Jessica sat up straight, hope surging through her. "Bala, you don't have to. You can help us. Please let us go." Bala looked conflicted, his eyes darting toward the door. "If they catch me—" "They won't," Jessica interrupted. "God is with us. He will protect you." Daniel chimed in, his voice urgent. "Bala, you know this isn't right. You can stop it now. Help us and we'll never forget what you've done." Bala hesitated for what felt like an eternity. Then he nodded. "Hey. Tonight. I'll find a way to get you out." The hours crawled by as Jessica and Daniel waited for nightfall. Jessica clung to her faith, praying silently as the kidnappers moved about the house, oblivious to what was about to happen. When darkness finally fell, Bala returned. He motioned for them to follow him quietly. Jessica's heart pounded as they crept through the dimly lit corridors, every shadow feeling like a threat. They reached a back door and Bala opened it cautiously. The cool night air hit Jessica's face, filling her with a rush of hope. "Go," Bala whispered urgently. "There's a path through the forest. Keep going until you reach the road. Don't stop." Jessica paused, tears streaming down her face. "Bala, thank you. May God bless you for this." He nodded, his expression unreadable, and motioned for them to hurry. Jessica and Daniel stepped into the darkness, their hearts racing as they ran toward freedom. Jessica's legs burned with every step, her heart pounding as she and Daniel dashed through the dense forest. Twigs snapped underfoot, and the night air was filled with the chirping of crickets and the occasional distant howl. The path Bala had mentioned was barely visible, and the darkness seemed to close in around them. "Keep moving," Jessica whispered to Daniel, who was stumbling slightly from exhaustion. "Madam, I don't know how much longer I can go," Daniel panted, his voice filled with despair. "You can do it," Jessica said firmly. "We're almost there." Her words were fueled by faith rather than certainty. She didn't know where the road was or if they were even heading in the right direction. But she clung to the belief that God was guiding their steps. Suddenly, the sound of raised voices pierced the silence. "They've escaped." Jessica's heart dropped. The kidnappers had discovered their absence. A gunshot rang out, shattering the stillness of the night. Jessica froze for a split second before grabbing Daniel's arm and urging him forward. "Run." The forest seemed endless, each step feeling like a battle against the weight of fear and exhaustion. Jessica's mind raced as she prayed silently. "Lord, please shield us. Let us not fall into their hands again." The shouts grew louder, the kidnappers closing in. Jessica's lungs burned and her feet ached, but she refused to stop. She thought of her family, her mother's face flashing before her eyes, and the promise of Christmas together. Then through the thick trees she saw a faint glow of headlights in the distance. "The road!" Jessica exclaimed, her voice trembling with hope. Daniel stumbled beside her, but the sight renewed his strength. They pushed forward, the glow growing brighter with each step. Bursting out of the forest, Jessica and Daniel found themselves on a quiet highway. A lone truck was approaching, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Jessica waved her arms frantically, her voice hoarse as she shouted for help. The truck slowed to a stop and the driver, a burly man with a concerned expression, stepped out. "What's going on? Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes darting between Jessica and Daniel. "Please help us," Jessica begged. "We were kidnapped and they're chasing us." The man's face darkened with alarm. "Get in the truck. Quickly." Jessica and Daniel scrambled into the back of the truck as the man climbed into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, and the truck sped off just as the kidnappers emerged from the forest. Gunshots rang out, one bullet hitting the side of the truck, but the driver didn't slow down. Jessica crouched low, her hands trembling as she clutched Daniel's arm. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. The truck drove for nearly an hour before stopping at a police checkpoint. Jessica's relief was overwhelming as she explained their ordeal to the officers, who immediately radioed for backup. "You're safe now," one of the officers assured her. Jessica nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you. God bless you." Daniel, who had been silent for most of the ride, finally spoke. Madam, I thought we were going to die back there. But your faith, it kept us going. Jessica looked at him, her tear-streaked face softening. It wasn't just my faith, Daniel. It was God. He never left us, even when it felt hopeless. The following day, Jessica and Daniel were taken to a police station where they provided statements. The officers informed them that the kidnappers were known criminals and that efforts were already underway to track them down. Jessica couldn't stop thinking about Bala. She prayed silently for his safety, hoping that his decision to help them would not lead to his harm. After completing the formalities, Jessica was finally able to call her family. "Mama," she said, her voice breaking as soon as she heard her mother's voice. "Jessica. My daughter, are you safe?" "Yes, Mama. I'm safe. God delivered me." Her mother burst into tears, and Jessica could hear her father and siblings shouting in the background, their voices filled with relief and joy. "We've been praying non-stop," her mother said through her sobs. "God is faithful." Jessica smiled through her tears. "Yes, Mama. He truly is." By evening, Jessica was on her way to her parents' home, this time accompanied by police escorts. As the car pulled into the driveway, the sight of her family waiting for her brought a fresh wave of tears. Mama Adeoye ran to Jessica, enveloping her in a tight embrace. "My baby, thank God you're here. Thank God you're alive." Jessica held her mother tightly, her heart overflowing with gratitude. "Mama, I'm home. God brought me back to you." That night, the family gathered in the living room, the atmosphere filled with warmth and thanksgiving. Jessica recounted her ordeal, her voice trembling as she described how her faith had sustained her through the darkest moments. Her father, a man of few words, spoke with rare emotion. "Jessica, your story is a testament to the power of prayer and God's protection. We will never stop thanking Him for your life." Later, as Jessica lay in her childhood bed, she reflected on everything that had happened. The fear, the prayers, Bala's courage, and the miraculous escape, it all felt like a dream. Opening her prayer journal, she wrote, "Lord, you are my deliverer. When I was lost in darkness, you were my light. Thank you for never leaving me, for hearing my prayers, and for using Bala to save us. I will never stop trusting you." With a deep sense of peace, Jessica closed her journal and drifted off to sleep, her heart full of gratitude. Christmas morning dawned bright and serene in Jessica's hometown. The gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh dew and blooming flowers, while the joyful sounds of children playing filled the air. It was as if the entire world had joined Jessica in celebrating her newfound freedom. She woke up to the familiar sounds of her mother bustling in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared the family's Christmas feast. Jessica stretched, her heart swelling with gratitude. The events of the past week felt like a distant nightmare, but the lessons and miracles were etched into her soul. As she stepped into the living room, her family greeted her with warm smiles. Her siblings had decorated the house beautifully, draping garlands and twinkling lights over the furniture. The large Christmas tree in the corner was adorned with ornaments, many of which Jessica remembered from her childhood. "Good morning, my angel," Mama Adeoye said, pulling Jessica into a tight hug. "Good morning, Mama," Jessica replied, tears pricking her eyes. "I'm so thankful to be here with you." Her father walked over, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're a miracle, Jessica. God truly answered our prayers." The family gathered for breakfast, a spread of warm akra, fluffy yam porridge, and steaming cups of ginger tea. As they ate, laughter and stories filled the room, the love between them palpable. But Jessica's thoughts kept drifting to Daniel and Bala. She knew Daniel would be spending Christmas with his own family, safe and sound, but she worried about Bala. Had he escaped the wrath of the kidnappers? Was he safe? "Mama," Jessica began, setting her fork down, "I'd like us to pray for someone who helped me during the kidnapping." Her mother nodded. "Of course, my dear. What's his name?" "Bala. He was one of the kidnappers, but he wasn't like the others. He saved my life and Daniel's. I want to pray that God protects him and leads him to a better life." The family bowed their heads and Jessica led the prayer, her voice steady and filled with emotion. Later that afternoon, the family attended a Christmas service at their local church. The air was alive with joy as the congregation sang carols, their voices rising to the heavens. Jessica felt an overwhelming sense of peace as she joined in the worship, her hands lifted high. When the pastor began his sermon, his words seemed to speak directly to her heart. Christmas is a reminder of God's love and faithfulness, he said. Even in our darkest moments, His light shines through. He never abandons us, and His plans for us are always good. Jessica closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face as she whispered a silent prayer. Thank you, Lord, for being my light in the darkness. I will share your goodness with everyone I meet. That evening, the Adioi household was abuzz with activity. Friends and neighbors arrived, bringing gifts and warm greetings. The dining table was laden with jollof rice, grilled fish, suya, and a variety of other festive dishes. Laughter echoed through the house as everyone shared stories and celebrated the spirit of Christmas. Jessica stood in a corner watching the joyful scene unfold. Her heart was full, yet she felt a deep desire to do more to turn her harrowing experience into a testimony that could inspire others. Her younger brother, Tund, approached her holding a plate of puff-puff. Sister Jessica, you've been quiet. Are you okay? Jessica smiled, ruffling his hair. I'm more than okay, Tund. I was just thinking about how blessed I am to have all of you. Tund grinned. We're blessed to have you too. As the evening wound down, Jessica sat with her parents on the veranda, the cool night air wrapping around them. The stars above shone brightly, a reminder of the hope she had clung to in her darkest hours. Mama, Papa, Jessica began, her voice soft. I want to do something meaningful with my life. I don't want what happened to me to be in vain. Her father nodded, his eyes thoughtful. What do you have in mind? I want to start an organization to help people like Bala, Jessica said. People who feel trapped in darkness but are searching for light. I want to show them that God's love can transform their lives. Her mother's eyes filled with pride. That's a beautiful idea, my child. God has given you a powerful testimony. Use it to bring others closer to Him. Jessica smiled, a sense of purpose igniting within her. A week later, Jessica took the first steps toward her vision. With the support of her family, she began planning an outreach program to visit prisons and rehabilitation centers, sharing her story and offering hope to those in need. The impact was immediate. People were moved by her testimony, and many found the courage to seek a better path. Jessica knew this was only the beginning of the journey God had planned for her. As the year came to a close, Jessica reflected on everything she had experienced. The joy, the fear, the despair, and the miraculous deliverance, all of it had shaped her into a stronger, more faithful person. Her faith in God had carried her through the storm, and now she was determined to be a beacon of light for others. This Christmas was not just a celebration of family and love. It was a celebration of life, hope, and the unshakable power of faith.